Abby Reyes is director of the Community Resilience Projects at UC Irvine and author of Truth Demands, a memoir of murder, oil wars, and the rise of climate justice. It's a powerful, gripping story you're about to hear. She'll be joined by my Climate One co-host, Kusha Navadar. Please welcome Abby and Kusha.
Hi, Abby.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. Thank you for hanging out with us. It's been really meaningful for me and for the whole team to get to read parts of your book, get to listen to the talks that you've been giving, and I just want to start by saying thank you for your time being here.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. Let's share a little bit of the story. Is it okay if we spend some time on that?
We can.
Okay, great. So let's go to the mid-1990s. So you're in the Philippines, right? Working with rural fishing communities. Shell Oil, Occidental Petroleum announced plans to build a pipeline through some of those communities, right? What parallels did you see between what was happening in the Philippines and where your story would eventually take you in Colombia?
The parallels that I will describe are in part about the oil companies, but they're in more important part about the communities themselves. I was in the Philippines, which is my father's homeland, as someone just early out of college, learning under the tutelage of Jesuit lawyers there in the Philippines who had just deposed Marcos I. And this is the time in which the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Framework was brand new. Philippine Constitution, brand new. And a lot of that implementation of those ways of governing the relationship between humans and the natural world in that country were devolved to local government. So we were there with lawyers who were both training local government and enforcement agencies on how to think about sustainable development, how to think about human rights, what are environmental laws, what is a marine protected area, how do you change timber harvest policy in these far-flung remote islands. And at the same time, allegiant foremost to the indigenous and non-indigenous campesinos or farming communities and fishing communities that had heretofore been left behind and left out and otherwise disinvested, much in a parallel context to what we see here domestically, and that we can talk about more later. And the work, as I learned it as a very young person, was very much the work of listening and of relationship and of taking the cue from the culture and history of place and people there who already knew how to navigate the waters, already knew how to live sustainably in those mountains and on those islands, on that coastline, managing the mangrove. And the work there, at the moment that Shell and Occidental Petroleum came to say, we're going to build a pipeline for gas through your ancestral fishing waters, was a moment that we had been preparing for. A lot of the work that we did was direct legal services, but also policy and advocacy, and also training. So using popular education to train folks on everything from how to do citizens arrest when neighbors are using cyanide to fish or dynamite to fish, or using illegal logging methods in the protected hardwoods. Everything from that to the policy work of stopping the illegal commercial fishing that had taken over and was the root cause of a lot of the other kinds of environmental degradation that were happening there. So at the moment that these oil companies came to do the pro forma proverbial knock on the door consultation with the community, that consultation, for example, happened just on the edge of the territory. They were not invited any further in.
Just enough to get by.
They had to turn around on their banca or their outrigger boat and go home. And at that point, community leaders turned to my mentors and said, "What do we know? What do we know about what these companies are capable of? What do we know about how these companies interact with the autonomous, self-governed indigenous communities in other parts of the world?" And so when I came back from the Philippines to California, I did some of that research. And here in the Bay Area, this was before I had a cell phone, when we just barely had dial-up internet. And there was an entity, Project Underground, that was cataloging and amplifying the answer to that question in communities all around the world. This is the time in which Earth Rights International in Southeast Asia was beginning to document the murder, rape, torture in the course of forced labor on Unical's pipeline through Burma. This was the time in which the violence of Shell in Nigeria was coming to light with the Ogoni
And is
Nine.
that how you got hooked up to Colombia?
What happened was I went to Project Underground to learn about these things, and my colleague Danny Kennedy introduced me to Terrence Unity Freitas, who was also a young person, just like me, who was working with the Colombian U'wa people native to the northeast corner of Colombia, and they were fighting the very same oil companies.
And there's that parallel that you were seeing.
The parallel was indeed in that it was the same corporations. The parallel was also that the community was very clear. The community was very clear over time. The incursion of the oil companies into their territory, where their ancestral and demarcated lands sit on the mother lode of oil, most of which was at that time for export here to the United States. They have always been very clear.
Yeah. The U'wa.
The U'wa people in that part of Colombia have been the voice. In my youth, they were the ones first introducing me to the idea we've just got to keep it in the ground.
And we're going to come to that. But you mentioned somebody very important that I want to learn more about, Terrence. Who is Terrence? What did he mean to you? Tell us a little bit about him.
Terrence Unity Freitas was a UC Santa Cruz graduate, environmental studies, Hapkido expert, early environmental and indigenous rights advocate. By early I mean young. We were just out of college.
Yeah, so like early mid-20s.
Early mid-20s.
Yeah.
And he became the main liaison between the U'wa Pueblo and the 8 to 10 non-governmental organizations who worked in the areas of environment, of human rights, of indigenous rights, here in the States, Australia, Europe, who had come to walk alongside the U'wa community when they figured out that they needed international solidarity because their requests of those oil companies to meet face-to-face was being unmet. And Terrence, very quickly, in that first day of learning about the U'wa struggle from him, in the middle of our briefing, he stopped and asked me out on a date. And
what did he want to do?
well, my
Go for a hike.
John Seed, who's an Australian deep ecologist, was in town, and he was performing that night. And I had not seen John since I was in high school. John and Joanna Macy, who's a teacher of mine, had profoundly influenced my my own understanding of my relationship to the earth, and as somewhat through their practices, had really taught me that it was actually within my right and within my duty to go ahead and let myself feel the grief about what we were doing to the planet. And that was, when I was 15, 16, that was Joanna Macy's work, and derivatively the work of John Seed were part of building that context for me, off of a childhood that entailed a lot of reverence for the interconnectedness of life.
And so what was the first date?
So the first date was going to see John Seed perform
in
some marginal makeshift venue somewhere in the East Bay. This is so long ago.
Yeah.
27 years ago now.
Oh, that sounds like a really fun first date. So Terrence asks you out. You're both doing important work together, getting to know each other. You did mention the importance of the U'wa in the way that they thought about the earth. And I want to dive into that a little bit. A part of the book that was meaningful for me to read, I want to dive into it a little bit, and I'm going to read what you wrote. So I'm going to borrow your words here. You said, U'wa leaders were the first people I ever heard call for a humanity to simply keep the oil in the ground. For them, it isn't about a sustainable development framework or natural resource management. It is about reestablishing the equilibrium between the world above and the world below the surface of the earth. That was from your book. You touched on this. I want to dive into it deeper. How did that affect your thinking?
Well, that understanding of our human relationship made sense to me. Mm-hmm. What I learned from the U'wa, from my U'wa colleagues, was the steadfastness and the comfort and agility in going ahead and saying that out loud and acting from that understanding of one's interdependence with the rest of life.
Saying what out loud?
Saying out loud that we are the earth protecting itself. And going ahead and acknowledging that those that are bringing us the kinds of environmental injustice and harms that we may talk more about today, we are part of the human family, and when that harm is present, the understanding is at once a fierce defense, a fierce message of no, and of, wow, we've got a long way to go.
You used the word understanding, which leads me to another part that struck me. It's kind of like a catchphrase that the U'wa used, I suppose. They described outsiders as, quote, the people who don't think well. And I was like, oh, that probably applies to me in many circumstances. And you talk about understanding, and when that part for me, I thought about that cultural divide between those within the community and those without, and there's so many parallels there. I want to talk about that a little bit. How can cultural divides be bridged when the powerful entities see indigenous folks as backward or slow, and locals see outsiders as fast and careless? What do you do about that?
There is a skill of knowledge brokering that the communities with which I have been lucky enough to work over years are training their young people to do. Mm. And the key to it is troubling this notion of power, of who has the power. What kind of power?
Yeah.
What kind of power is it? Yes, there's the power of the gun. Yes, there's the power of the dollar. Yes, there's the power of the signing of the cross. But there is also a power that lives in our lived and inviolate connection with the earth and with the rivers running and with the cycles of the movement of air and water that is a different starting point, and one that connects us when we're willing to speak from it and willing to harness it, connects us powerfully to the generations that have come before us, that have gotten us to this moment of collective acceleration that we are experiencing right now, and allows us to stand in allegiance with generations yet to come. When we figure out how to go ahead and let those relationships be true, we have a better chance of getting in alignment with the people who are ready, making the pivots we need to make to the far horizon, and doing some of that work together, which is joyful work, even in the face of devastation, to imagine what is it when there are no asthma respirators in the nurse's office at the public school? What is it when we have drinkable rivers?
Yeah.
What is it when we have the rains return, the gentle rains return to this region? That is the far horizon. Some of that is more intermediate. But the kinds of power that become available in the knowledge brokering have some of that at the source.
Yeah. And
So that the conversation changes.
And Terrence was a part of that knowledge brokering and trying to bridge the U'wa with that knowledge of also what was happening outside of the community as well, right? And how to
Yes, it was multi-directional.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that power a little bit. I also heard you use the word steadfastness before, which seems to be in close play here. We're going to January 1999. You, Terrence, two of his colleagues, Lahe and Ingrid, are preparing to enter a country in war. This is from the book, a conflict in which hundreds of thousands of people had been killed. They were planning to travel to a rural community to learn from, work with, and support the U'wa, who are standing in the way of one of the most powerful corporations in the world. And I read that and I wonder, what kind of person is that? What kind of person knowingly, willingly takes on that risk?
Earth rights defenders around the world in legion take this risk every day. Terrence, Ingrid, and Lahe were taking this risk at a particular heightened moment of Colombia's internal conflict in a region in which oil pipelines were a magnet for armed violence. They took the risks that they took in the context of knowing that they were not alone, and in deep relationship with indigenous folks who were living those risks every day. Themselves.
Yeah.
And so part of what I learned recently looking at some of Terrence's notebooks from the time was his own musings to himself of, if Roberto's going to, risk his life, why shouldn't I?
He wrote that.
And it's a challenging question. What is it about positions of our national identity, of our where our lot has been cast in this global play? What is it that allows a person to cut through those positionings to understand one's interrelatedness, not only to the concepts of justice and defense of earth rights, so to speak, but also in relationship to people, right, in which there are, over time, the development of relationships of accountability.
Do you have a sense of what you think that is?
I mean, I do because I'm a mom.
Yeah.
I do. All the moms here know. It's because of the moms. The moms teach that.
Yeah.
The moms teach that. Terrence's mom definitely taught that. My mom, who is here in the audience, definitely taught that.
Hey, Mom. Let's jump ahead a little bit to February 25th, 1999. Tough day. On the way to the regional airport to come back home, they were kidnapped, Ingrid, Lahaye, Terrence. You heard that the three of them had been taken by people who self-identified to the U'wa as the FARC. And the FARC is the Marxist-Leninist group that fought the Colombian government for decades. Then about a week later, you got a phone call. Can you just tell us about that phone call?
Well, the first phone call was on that day of February 25th when we found out they had been kidnapped.
Okay.
And that phone call led us into a sprint that was unending and terrifying for the next 8 days while we were trying to find them and get them safely home. And the movements of that week entailed the bringing together, of course, of 3 families and chosen families of the people who had been taken, but also multiple Native American, North American tribes. The U'wa Pueblo itself in Colombia, layers upon layers of non-governmental organizations from various sectors here in the States and all around the world. It was a massive undertaking under what, for me as a 24-year-old, was extreme duress.
Yeah.
And then the phone call you're referring to on day 8 was the moment in which our colleague, Jose Barrera, who is Ingrid's dear friend, we were all assembled at the American Indian Community House in Manhattan during the kidnapping, mobilizing for the release. He received a phone call from Ingrid's office that 3 bodies had been found. And at first, it didn't sound like their bodies. It sounded like different bodies. So for about half an hour, I was like, this is not them. These are other bodies. Bless the passing of those people, but those are not our people. In that moment, Ingrid's 12-year-old son came in the room and asked me what was happening, and it was probably the worst moment of my life. And then we confirmed. 1 woman with an eagle tattoo, 1 woman with a triangle, and one young man with dark curly hair. It was them.
Worst day of your life?
Bar none.
And to be clear, you think Occidental Petroleum had been paying FARC protection money?
Occidental made that clear to the U.S. Congress shortly thereafter, while they used the murders as a rallying cry for more war in Colombia, as a rallying cry for increased military aid connected to Colombia's commitment to opening up more oil.
And do you feel like that was typical of how multinational corporations were operating in these countries at the time? Can you talk more about that?
We can rely even only on the words of the oil company themselves about how typical this was.
Yeah.
It was a practice common in that particular conflict and is well documented in political science literature around the world. Because oil pipelines are easy targets, often oil companies need to pay to prevent them from being bombed.
Yeah.
So those are the payments that the oil company, in this case Occidental, itself has testified to Congress about.
Yeah. You were 24, right? This, and I'm sure many other things, but this sent you on a path of your career and a very long path with the U'wa people, either in direct contact or tangentially, just for justice, for truth. And it was a long road, right? And I appreciate so much, Abby, your willingness to sit here and relive these moments with us. And there are chapters to this, and the chapters that follow are long and hard. And I'm wondering, what happened with the oil development and with the U'wa people in the intervening years?
Well, the period immediately following the murders was a steep learning curve for me in both figuring out how to navigate the waters of a tremendous grief and anger, and how to navigate Congress. Yeah. And there were many way more seasoned advocates together with us, from whom I learned a lot. And even while the lobbying, this pitched battle between the oil companies and the people's movements from rural Colombia who had marshaled and come to Washington to tell Washington, no, we don't want this escalation of our war. It's going to play out in the countryside in a manner that will eviscerate our economies, our local economies, and change the face of this countryside. That was all playing out here in the States, while at the very same time, the oil company used the escalation of war as a cover for quickly moving its equipment into place.
I see.
And so in response, this highly organized and cohesive set of indigenous communities blocked the road for months in what became a regional rallying cry there for saying no. So thousands of people, not just indigenous people, also the farmers, also the students, also the clergy, the media, the human rights bar, camping on the road. Wow. And occupying the two farms where Oxy wanted to sink a new exploratory well, which the community has long asserted was ill. The permission to sink that well was ill-given by the Colombian government. In the course of saying no with their bodies, they were met with more violence that indeed hit a crescendo, ultimately in the forced violent removal of people from blocking the road, including women and children, including moms who were carrying babies on their backs and were pushed to the edge of the river and had to choose the river. More life taken. Babies can't get out of a mom's carrier that quick. So all of these were happening at the same time. So to answer your
Congress
question,
and the battle, yeah.
Yes. And my poor mom is probably reliving this right now as I tell it. What happened because of the steadfastness, we were also pursuing every legal venue possible. Like Miss Margaret was saying earlier, we were in the room. We were in every room because we were many different capabilities from different positionalities with different kinds of access to different rooms. Mm-hmm. And so one of those was the long-standing petition in front of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights against the Colombian government on behalf of the U'wa community to say, look, the government has not done the required consultation and consent process here. Rights that are enshrined for indigenous peoples long before the 1999 murders, but then we would do well to evoke and recall that one of the people whose life was taken with Terrence was Ingrid Washenawatuk, a beloved Menominee leader from Wisconsin, one of the main architects of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that got passed 7 years after her death, after her murder, and in which indigenous peoples around the world hook on to the rights enshrined in that declaration, and from which the U'wa community's petition against their own national government long preceded the declaration, because the rights were already there in different instruments of international law. So in that petition, some of the basis of which one of my U'wa colleagues recently remarked, the very first maps that showed the overlap between the indigenous territory and the oil was a map that Terry and his dad made.
Oh, wow.
Some of the basis, some of the documentation that originated their case. And long story short, even as I have only now been able to write this book regarding the truth demands, just a few months ago, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights decided the U'wa case completely in favor of the community. They won a recognition of the wrongs by the Colombian government against indigenous peoples in an opinion, in a decision that strengthens the right of indigenous peoples across Latin America.
Wow.
So there were many ups and downs in the field, on the road, where the oil, where Occidental ultimately through violence did sink its exploratory well. They failed. So we, as a coalition of entities working steadfastly also alongside the U'wa Pueblo, and the U'wa Pueblo itself, claimed the victory against Occidental at that one moment in time. The U'wa ancients, what gets translated into English as the wise ancients, would say that part of the resistance, part of the advocacy effort that was happening in their part of the mountains was through song and through petitioning the oil to move, which is what they think happened.
I can't imagine how it must have felt for you to be taken on like the worst moments of your life to feeling justice in some sense be served, some release of this work that you've been working on. At the same time, in December 2023, the Colombian government became the largest oil and coal producer to endorse the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So to kind of give some context to this, there were signatories of the treaty. They pledged to leave undeveloped resources in the ground, which is kind of what the U'wa people were saying all along. Colombia says, yeah, that sounds good.
Actually, they were right, yeah.
How did it feel for you to hear Colombia say that?
Well, how I feel, I don't know if it matters, but I just yesterday was asking an U'wa colleague, how should I answer this question? And what they, with clarity, replied was their petition to the president of Colombia right now is to sit at the table. Mm-hmm. They just got a huge slap on the wrist from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the highest human rights tribunal in the hemisphere. And it is a victory for Pueblo U'wa. And the devil's in the details of implementation. The devil's in the details of who gets to sit at the table. Yeah. And when is the table going to form? And will this finally be a moment in which the colonial land titles issued by the King of Spain that guarantee the rights of the U'wa community, will the contemporary significance of those land titles finally get clarified? These are titles that came out of the woodworks right at the height of the violence that I was describing in 2000. Mm-hmm. And which we put immediately in front of Colombian domestic courts to say, wait, here, actually, from before the time that Colombia became a nation state, this land has been declared U'wa. But our arguments in that period were met with silence, and that's part of what the Inter-American Court of Human Rights just opened back up, right, to require the government to come to the table and talk about those titles. And they're not just titles that affect the U'wa. Those titles exist among communities all over Latin America. So it as well as, the U'wa have many claims that just got clarified and affirmed through the court. Their message now and request to their own government, whatever significant and important gesture it is to be the largest country signing on or participating in the talks about a proposed fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which is an incredibly important, an incredibly important instrument. No matter what happens there, in parallel, the U'wa community have very concrete requests for how to make that vision a reality right now.
You've been on such a journey with this, and it has taken you far beyond just Colombia as well. I mean, now we started this conversation talking about mid-1990s working in the Philippines. You later were co-chair of Earth Rights International. Now you're the director of community resilience projects at UC Irvine. You have such a wealth of knowledge to draw upon. Our fossil fuel economy has been supported by the idea of sacrifice zones. I heard it in the conversation just before ours. I want to talk a little bit about the work today, what you're dealing with today. How does your work today challenge the idea of sacrifice zones? Can you go into that a little bit?
Oh, sure. The work today here in California is joyful work. I work with community leaders in climate vulnerable places here in the state and their academic allies to learn how to work together better so that they can accelerate community-owned, community-driven just transition solutions. We work with academics who understand that the relevance of their research is in part determined by application right now. And we work with community leaders that are organized, which are in abundance in climate vulnerable places here in the state, in which the analysis through story and through critical dialogue is very clear that we get to the climate justice future we seek in part by stacking functions that the solutions that are coming out of communities are addressing economic justice at the same time, are addressing belonging, are addressing what it takes to thrive and stay in place and not get displaced even as we make this place more livable. All of those layers at once. And that is happening under a rubric commonly described as community-driven climate resilience planning. And it happens through methods of popular education facilitation, of just transition, of participatory action research, in which the researcher-community relationship is turned on its head, and the research questions are being generated through various democratic processes.
And I wanted to touch on that because there's another piece that I've learned about your work that has been on my mind ever since I knew we were going to have this conversation. And I think it's a lovely place to land on in this conversation. And I'm looking at the clock. We could talk about this for so long. But something I've learned about your work is that your current teaching and advocacy focus not just on fighting the bad, quote unquote, but building the new. And I guess the last thought to leave ourselves on is, what new do you feel like we most need to build?
Well, what I'm learning a lot from my comrades in Santa Ana, California, which is a Mexican-majority mid-sized city south of LA in the northern part of Orange County. It's the community to which I'm accountable in a daily kind of way. They are innovating the infrastructure for incubating worker-owned cooperatives, for putting into actual brick and mortar, actual acres of land, community land trusts, urban farms the infrastructure for mutual aid that we saw rise during the pandemic, and that is still every day relevant and useful and necessary infrastructure as we confront climate disaster, as well as health equity infrastructure. These kinds of mobilizations are happening in a way that people are both understanding and communicating and deepening with a wide range of community folks this concept of community ownership. And when I was telling our U'wa companions about this California-based work, which, by the way, is happening in disinvested communities all over the United States, where many folks are also now rallying around the building of community climate resilience centers.
When you were telling the U'wa people, what
when I was telling the U'wa people, we were in some rare downtime during the hearing at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which was happening in Santiago, Chile, a couple years ago. When I was talking about this work, one colleague from the U'wa community reflected, well, it's the same work. It's the same work. We're doing the same work. There's the blocking the bad, there's the building the new, and it is actually part and parcel of the same work. And that's where my next writing wants to go.
Well, I can't wait to read about it. And for what you've written now, on behalf of everyone here, I just want to say thank you for putting it onto the page, for taking that lived experience and doing something with it, and for sitting with us now. It means a great deal to me and to everyone here, I'm sure.
It means a great deal to me.
Yeah.
Please know that.
Abby Reyes is the Director of Community Resilience Projects at University of California, Irvine, and is the author of Truth Demands, a memoir of murder, oil wars, and the rise of climate justice. Abby, thank you.
Thank you.